I was thirsty. I got up. I went to get something to drink in the kitchen. When I opened the fridge, I was naked. Her mom saw me. Her mom was like, wow.
You carried on a sexual relationship with the defendant, Mr. Gonzalez. It will break your heart if she has to grow up without a dad. But because of Miss Salvo's repeated lies, you have no idea if it's true. Salvo had sex with multiple men, including your best friend.
I can't stand him. He knows Amaya's his daughter, but he refuses to take care of him. Ever had sex with any Hispanic man but him. I was drunk, he came over, he got me at the right time.
Okay.
Yes, and he's claiming that it's been multiple, no.
It was more than 6 times.
So tell me.
One thing led to another. We started kissing. We started touching on each other. We went to the room. We had sex.
Go ahead with your details, because I will say this, you have come prepared for court with your details.
Okay. Yes, I had a fiance at the time.
Oh!
And she knew it. But really, I used to go to Ashley's house to go get my hair done and get a little treat.
Did you ever use protection when you were having sex with Miss Salvo?
Maybe once or twice.
It's false, it's incorrect.
Yes, Your Honor. The whole part 6 times, that's ridiculous. It wasn't even good, so why would I keep going?
So,
inside the court of Judge Lauren Lake, the matter opens as a standard paternity dispute, but immediately expands into a far deeper legal and emotional inquiry. The court is not merely determining parental identity. It is weighing integrity, conflicting testimony, financial responsibility, memory, and long-held emotional wounds, while applying doctrines recognizable in the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Judge Lauren Lake listens as both parties enter the courtroom with years of confusion behind them. The petitioner insists that the child deserves clarity, and the respondent requests closure after years of doubt. The judge clarifies that this case will not only settle biological truth, but also settle legal obligations layered through accusations, inconsistent statements, emotional claims, and misaligned expectations. The judge then frames the matter in terms that echo the ongoing discussion in modern legal analysis: factual truth versus testimonial memory, emotional suffering versus legal evidence, and moral fairness versus procedural mandates. At this stage, the judge acknowledges that, like those discussed on the Divorce Course podcast, claims of infidelity, financial abandonment, and parental absence require evidence, not narrative dominance. This is where the adverse inference in evidence act becomes relevant. If crucial proof is withheld, avoided, or delayed, the court may weigh behavior itself as evidence. The respondent explains extended years of financial strain under child support orders while requesting retroactive testing. He describes his identity during those years not as a father, but as a man forced into obligations without confirmation. The petitioner reflects on the emotional void, describing a life shaped not by physical abandonment, but by uncertainty and unanswered biological identity. Judge Lauren Lake notes that modern relational law, such as discussed on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, has increasingly emphasized the overlap between emotional injury and legal injury, especially in prolonged divorce case aftermaths, where children are attached to decisions they did not make. The court proceeds by addressing the archived communication history, missed testing opportunities, and contradictory explanations. Throughout the testimony, Judge Lauren Lake repeats the foundational principle often analyzed in relationship between law and justice forums. Justice is not achieved simply through procedural correctness, but by facilitating truth that is fair, complete, and restorative. Here, restoration is not merely biological confirmation, but emotional reentry, responsibility, and acknowledgement. As the court transitions toward consideration of the scientific submission, the DNA test becomes the central legal artifact. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes what people regret taking in the public discourse of paternity: not simply tests, but positions taken before facts were verified. At this moment, the judge reminds the parties that truth, whether freeing or painful, carries restorative potential. This is the reason Legal Narratives in the Truth Changes Everything podcast repeatedly emphasize that identity cases are never about one revelation, but an entire life's recalibration following it. The matter moves toward a decisive moment when evidence becomes more authoritative than memory. Judge Lauren Lake defines the difference between testimony, perception, and fact, reinforcing that while emotional claims may explain conduct, they do not determine biology. She acknowledges the emotional burden shared by adult children featured in adoption stories' full episodes, where family identity is reconstructed only after legal clarity is delivered. She reminds the parties that truth, once revealed in lawful procedure, does not erase history but finally organizes it. As the results approach, financial implications return to the forefront. The respondent highlights decades of wage garnishment and legal limitations caused by child support orders. Judge Lauren Lake carefully distinguishes the legal consequence system from biological truth, explaining that courts act on the information presented at the time of judgment. This mirrors precedent addressed across interviews in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, illustrating how individuals confront past legal burdens while seeking healing through verified truth. With the test document placed before her, Judge Lauren Lake defines the legal moment the courtroom has awaited, the scientific conclusion that cannot be debated, interpreted, or emotionally recast. The room becomes a study in the concept of justice in jurisprudence itself, law intervening not to punish but to clarify. She states that in cases shadowed by disputed paternity, unproven infidelity, and contested timelines, the DNA test is not a threat to identity. It is its first authentic foundation. The court acknowledges how media cases of cheating stories often distort responsibility, blaming personality rather than proving circumstance. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that the court does not weigh morality but legality, and does so without assumption. This is not a disciplinary review of past behavior, but a decisive, scientifically grounded answer to biological parenthood. Mention is made of financial backlog, emotional abandonment, and misdevelopment milestones. Yet Judge Lauren Lake restates that the law cannot compensate for time lost. It can only prevent continued injustice. She references the foundational doctrine repeatedly addressed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, explaining that good legal resolution does not erase pain, but structure it so life can proceed with informed responsibility. Finally, she directs both parties to understand that truth in a paternity courtroom has two purposes: reveal identity and reorganize duty. The judgment moment stands not as punishment or reward, but as final neutral clarity. The court prepares them for the next chapter of life after scientific confirmation, including avenues similar to those referenced in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals move from emotional entanglement to structured healing. And then, in full authority, Judge Lauren Lake reads the DNA test result aloud, delivering the truth the court has measured through testimony, financial records, emotional narratives, and procedural review. The room understands that while results end argument, they begin responsibility. In the closing order, the judge clarifies how future obligations, contact, and legal identity will proceed, guided strictly by the verified biological truth the court has now received. After the DNA test results are read by Judge Lauren Lake, the courtroom's structural atmosphere shifts from anticipation to recalibration. The judge notes for the record that the next phase is not emotional interpretation, but legal implementation. In the language often analyzed in the Divorce Course podcast, this is the moment where narrative stops and consequence starts. Whether the biological connection was confirmed or denied, The court now must address the responsibilities, remedies, and corrective pathways that follow scientific determination. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that while personal history, romantic entanglements, and disputed recollections form the outer surface of this case, the core remains legal parentage, financial accountability, and the equitable distribution of responsibility. The judge references the principles central to the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where truth is not only discovered but ordered and applied. The paternity outcome now unlocks every decision that future statutes allow, including adjustments or sustainment of child support terms, psychological support options for family reconciliation, and directives for continuing relationship structuring. Once the findings are recorded, the court turns to the emotional architecture that has existed for years without structure. Judge Lauren Lake notes that it is common for individuals who sought clarity to simultaneously encounter grief and relief. As discussed in spaces like Truth Changes Everything podcast, truth rarely arrives without cost, even when it offers liberation. Parents who assumed obligation, children who waited for acknowledgement, and guardians who filled absence must now position themselves according to verified identity, not memory-based expectation. The court then explains the process by which emotional impact is not dismissed but integrated. Although television court programs show tears, confessions, and regret, the judicial purpose is not catharsis. It is order. Judge Lauren Lake formally outlines how responsibility must now be recalculated according to statutory direction. The history of financial arrears, which the respondent described earlier, is addressed through the lens of post-determination remedy. If the DNA test confirmed parentage, the arrears become legitimate legal debt under the enforcement of family code. If it denied parenthood, the arrears become subject to retroactive review, which has historically been debated in the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys argue over fairness when truth arrives years after judgment. The judge explains that legal truth does not always eliminate emotional truth. A man may have acted as father in affection and commitment, even if genetic proof disengages him from legal definition. Likewise, a biological father may arrive decades late and still be required to assume cumulative responsibility. Judge Lauren Lake reminds the participants that courtrooms function under legal logic, not personal narrative, and yet both realities must coexist beyond this ruling. She describes the principle often echoed in rehabilitation shows like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, where people learn that truth is not an end but a restructuring. Accountability is not revenge but alignment. When parentage is confirmed, the duty is not symbolic. It is active, ongoing, and enforceable. When it is denied, emotional bonds previously formed may persist voluntarily, yet without statutory compulsion. This is where law and love diverge but may still operate in parallel. A distinction analyzed in relationship between law and justice circles, where morality influences but cannot replace statutory clarity. Judge Lauren Lake transitions into the explanatory section concerning post-judgment contact and involvement. The court addresses visitation frameworks, financial recalculations, and parenting expectations now anchored to factual certainty. In cases where paternal desire existed without confirmation, the DNA test allows movement toward legitimate involvement. In cases where involvement existed without biology, the court acknowledges the emotional contribution but cannot force continuation. As echoed in Adoption Stories full episodes, attachment and biology share the same space without requiring equivalence. Once the legal directives have been formalized, Judge Lauren Lake highlights a recurring societal misunderstanding, that people regret taking the test because they fear reality will undo emotional value. In truth, As the judge explains, testing does not destroy bonds, it clarifies them. Without clarity, every subsequent life decision is built on conjecture, not reality. That is why courts prioritize evidence above recollection, affection, or perceived fairness. The court now addresses the final procedural step, documentation. Paperwork is issued in accordance with the verified result. Financial agencies are notified if necessary, and custodial arrangements are updated. As discussed in Cheating Stories segments across legal commentary media, assumptions about loyalty, betrayal, or memory cannot legally dictate child identity. Only test results can do that. Judge Lauren Lake reiterates that this is not a ruling about personal character, but a definitive legal identity determination. Next, the court examines the relational fallout. Years of distance, silence, accusation, and misunderstanding now face reconstruction. The judge acknowledges that while she has delivered the legal truth, she cannot legislate reconciliation, forgiveness, or connection. Those elements exist outside judicial reach, aligned with the themes of restorative conversation that appear in Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes. Legal closure is not emotional closure, and emotional closure cannot rewrite documented truth. In explaining the aftermath, the judge emphasizes a principle frequently referenced in legal psychological studies: the difference between factual resolution and emotional recovery. Resolution is singular, recovery is ongoing. Families who experience late paternity discovery must rebuild identity frameworks, acknowledging missed years without losing future possibility. This aligns with the philosophical discussions in concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness is not just the right answer, but the right application of that answer across time. Judge Lauren Lake closes by reminding both parties that parentage, once verified, forms a non-reversible foundation. Even if conflict once overshadowed clarity, law now provides direction. Support orders, future communication, and mutual trust can only function when grounded in established truth. The court does not declare guilt, innocence, virtue, or blame. It declares fact. And fact is the only stable basis for parental identity, reflecting why legal systems globally rely on DNA test results instead of interpretive recollection. The official record concludes with instructions on next steps, administrative processing, optional counseling support, and standard follow-up compliance pathways. Judge Lauren Lake reiterates that while this moment may feel like a finale, it is actually structural beginning. Cases like these, observed across the divorce case sectors and analyzed in law media, often represent the first day in which parenting, identity, and responsibility exist without conjecture. The judge restates that truth is less dramatic than television implies, but more life-changing than participants often anticipate. The court has executed its duty, and now each life attached to it must move forward according to verified identity, legal accountability, and personal agency. The judge signals that while the case is legally concluded, the human lives it involves are entering a new structural stage, one grounded in documented fact rather than speculative lineage. Following the formal reading by Judge Lauren Lake, the courtroom enters its final interpretive phase, not of testimony but of restructuring. The judge clarifies that paternity resolution does not conclude when the envelope closes. It continues in administrative recalibration, emotional realignment, and lawful enforcement. The legal system does not function to create comfort, but to create clarity. Clarity, as echoed in Truth Changes Everything podcast, becomes the true inheritance, more enduring than biology, more transformative than disappointment. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that judicial authority is only half the equation. Personal integration forms the other half. The individuals who have lived in suspension, denial, longing, or resentment now must translate identity into future behavior. This is why, in reflective spaces like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, participants describe that the truth itself becomes the first step of healing, while its acceptance becomes the ongoing work. The court, therefore, leaves emotional continuation to life outside the bench, because continuation cannot be legislated. The judge then turns to the matter of future communication. In cases where parentage is confirmed, the legal requirement is presence, financial, structural, and developmental. If support had been contested or delayed, the law now moves into its enforcer role, not as punishment but as equity. The doctrine often explored in relationship between law and justice emphasizes that justice becomes meaningful only when law carries out truth rather than sentiment. That principle stands here without exception. It is also explained that parental identity determined by the DNA test holds legal supremacy over memory, speculation, or past disagreement. The court underscores that without verified biological truth, family life becomes contingent on assumption, which historically leads to the long-term relational disorientation seen in adoption stories' full episodes, where years of unverified origin create structural emotional fragmentation. Judge Lauren Lake confirms that the state cannot govern affection, but must govern identity. As documentation continues, the judge outlines next procedural obligations: child support correction, visitation frameworks if applicable, and access reassessment. These are not emotional privileges but legal responsibilities. It is here that legal philosophy aligns with the operational realities described on the Divorce Course podcast, where individuals discover that truth alters the administrative landscape of parenting just as profoundly as it alters emotional dynamics. The court then directly addresses the long-term psychological consequence of delayed truth. To have waited years or decades for biological identity means that the result, though accurate, arrives heavier than scientific clarity alone. Judge Lauren Lake notes that while the court system functions based on fact, humans have historically functioned based on attachment, longing, and unfinished questions. In this context, the resolution becomes both verdict and identity reconstruction assignment. As discussed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, this represents the moment law achieves something beyond adjudication, structured closure. Judge Lauren Lake now moves the discussion into the legal concept of adverse inference in evidence act, referencing that when refusal or delay in testing occurs, courts must interpret not only the truth but the obstruction of truth. Whether delay was intentional or systemic, the law acknowledges that time magnifies consequences. Missed childhood, suspended fatherhood, and unconfirmed lineage cannot be restored, only legally recognized. Courtrooms do not undo history, they authenticate it. She further clarifies the difference between assumed fatherhood and legally substantiated parentage. Emotional bonds may be self-constructed, community-supported, or circumstantially formed, but the state defines parenthood by truth verified under legal standard. This is how justice avoids the distortions sometimes portrayed in cheating stories, where betrayal narratives overshadow medical verification. In court, fidelity does not establish lineage, genetic proof does. The judge explains that the concluding directive in cases like this does not celebrate victory for one party nor defeat for another. It represents the stabilization of identity. Whether a father is confirmed or excluded, the truth burdens and liberates both sides. This is the same duality often articulated in Truth Changes Everything podcast, where truth becomes a catalyst that removes fiction but also forces adjustment. Administrative officers finalize the paperwork, ensuring that any financial corrections, if applicable, move through legal channels rather than emotional negotiation. Going forward, the judge reminds them that people regret taking tests not because truth harms them, but because truth demands new behavior. Avoidance protects comfort. Verification removes it. And yet, that removal is the only door to structured reality. In her closing explanation, Judge Lauren Lake reflects on how jurisprudence has historically held that family identity cases represent the intersection of law, biology, memory, and human need. The concept of justice in jurisprudence is not simply fairness but functionality. Identity must function, parenting must function, legal assignment must function. Truth makes that possible. The court finishes with a statement on emotional aftermath. Those who spent years without knowing must now build years knowing. Both confirmed fathers and confirmed non-fathers face the same new truth. Their roles, whether emerging or dissolving, must reflect the verified result rather than the emotional history that precedes it. Law requires acceptance. Recovery requires time. This is why structured support systems mirror the development seen in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where truth is internalized rather than resisted. Judge Lauren Lake closes the hearing with consistent judicial tone, not dramatic, not permissive, but grounded in the structure that family court must maintain. She informs the courtroom that identity, once authenticated, becomes legally immovable. The payment histories, emotional vacancies, and misunderstood silences now exist not as active injury but as historical context. The correction occurs not backward but forward. As the court clerk signals closure, Judge Lauren Lake makes one final clarification for the record. Paternity court is not a venue that entertains narrative conflict for spectacle. It is a venue where conflict is translated into verified identity, enforceable duty, and lived consequence. In this way, her role reflects the layered legal philosophy explored across relationship between law and justice inquiries. Law creates boundaries, justice humanizes them. The judge adjourns with legal directives finalized, financial documents ordered, and parenting expectations realigned. The courtroom, once filled with uncertainty, now contains only fact. And that fact, though weighty, is the only foundation from which future life can be built. In this, the outcome mirrors the tone of the Divorce Course podcast, where resolution is presented not as conclusion but as architecture. When truth enters, identity is no longer questioned but defined. Judge Lauren Lake confirms that this definition, carried out through verified DNA test, is now binding. Biological truth has been moved from personal argument into legal record. The court has spoken not to rewrite the past, but to formally name it.